Joining me now from our studios in Cape Town is Professor John Webb. He is from the Department of Mathematics at the University of Cape Town. And we also have Debbie Schafer, Minister of Education in the Western Cape. Let me begin with you, MEC. I mean, we saw the story in the Sunday Times. We all have to acknowledge that. But we also saw the conversation that has broken out around it and various people talking about various things. I wanted to get initially first your overall thoughts on some of the suggestions that have been made in that report. Of course, it has not yet been adopted, but what do you think of the proposals that are being made there?
I think they are generally very good proposals, and many of them we've been saying for quite some time. So it's a very welcome report that has now, well, it's not officially out, as you say, but it has been publicized. I have seen a copy of it. We particularly like the emphasis on quality, on testing, particularly matric markers, also on enhancing maths as well, and I was particularly interested in their comments on maths literacy, but they certainly seem to be placing an emphasis on quality, which is much needed.
If you were to look at it and say, should we take this in the Western Cape, are there any aspects that you would like taken out?
Well, we already are doing many of them in the Western Cape anyway, such as the matric markers competency testing. We are the only province to have done that, actually, which the report even acknowledges might have compromised our results last year, actually, because they were perhaps at slightly higher quality markers. We already are giving a lot of attention to maths and science in the Western Cape, foundation phase particularly, but the one point that is a concern is that our numbers taking maths versus maths literacy are decreasing in proportion to the maths literacy. So we would certainly like to emphasize that our learners should take more maths and science subjects.
Were you consulted in the compilation of the report?
No.
You were not. Okay, maybe the professor was consulted. Professor, let me come to you. So this report does seem to be talking about a lot of good things, a lot of things that people have been saying are wrong with South Africa's education system. Your overall thoughts first, and I also, of course, want to know if you were consulted.
No, I was not consulted.
Okay. Okay, so your overall thoughts on the report and some of the ideas that are coming through there.
Well, I do know a couple of the people who were consulted on the report, and I think that they have very sound and solid views, and on the whole I would agree with what the report recommends, although on the whole its recommendations are not really revolutionary. They are just basic, sound, solid sense.
Yeah. What would you add to the recommendations that we have seen?
I think there's a problem, at least as far as universities are concerned, about those students at the top of the ability range who are going to come to university. Currently the system generates far too many A symbols, not just A symbols in subjects, but in A aggregate symbols. So in previous years, one member of a class in 30 might get an A in mathematics or English or something. Yeah. Now half the class is getting A's. All the students who come into first year mathematics in, for example, engineering, have got not just A's in mathematics, but over 90% in mathematics. That's what the engineers have found they need to demand. This means there's been huge grade inflation in the examination, and overall that's not a good thing. It's not fair on the students to give them a false impression of their abilities.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say to you. Is it a problem because the results are not reflective of the capability of the students when they actually get into class?
That is the problem, yes, because we can't even tell with an A symbol whether that student is going to make it or not.
I mean, see, where would the problem lie with this? Is it just the inflation that the professor is talking about, or it's a systemic issue here where perhaps we go back to the issue of the quality of the markers themselves as well?
Yes, I do think that is the crux of the problem. It's the fact that they are obtaining those marks on the exams is indicative, in my view, of the fact that the quality is not where it should be. And that is where the importance of testing comes in, which is another initiative we have in the Western Cape. We have expanded our testing in grades 3, 6 and 9 for both literacy and numeracy. And our tests are different to the annual national assessments which are done by national government in that they are benchmarked at an international quality. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that the results we get on the internationally benchmarked tests are in line with international standards. And that, I think, is where we're falling short.
So what would you suggest to this reform team? I would imagine now that they've made their recommendations to the minister, they'll come back perhaps for more consultations with the individual provinces.
I would recommend that they improve the. We go with the annual national assessments, but we aren't satisfied that the quality of those tests are up to scratch, and we would recommend that they improve those in line with our grade 3, 6 and 9 systemic tests, internationally benchmark the tests, and then use the results of those tests to see where the weaknesses are and put concentrated efforts and interventions in to those areas.
Yeah.
I would also go very strongly with holding principals accountable, which we also do already, and it does appear that the National Minister is moving towards doing that. Is holding the principals accountable directly for improvements in their schools, setting targets and monitoring their performance on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, which is the start of tackling another bigger problem, isn't it? The unions and their role in education, and also their attitude to being held accountable in terms of their members.
It has been a problem. Fortunately, in the Western Cape, it hasn't been too bad. We have a number of unions in the Western Cape, and obviously they have an important role to play, and we would really like to work with them in ensuring that we increase and improve the quality of education. But yes, I know they certainly have stood in the way of some important reforms, and I have to wonder why, because I would imagine it's in all of our interests to ensure that the education in our country is improved.
As a policymaker, what do you think is the best way of approaching this? Should we go back to the Margaret Thatcher tactics of the 1980s, or do we sit down around a table with them and try and see if we can find consensus?
It's always better to find consensus if possible. I think it brings people more on board and makes everyone buy into the process as a team effort. It is really a team effort, and I would prefer that approach. It would appear in some provinces that may not be possible, in which case we would have to take a harder line. But obviously consensus and working together is always the best option.
Absolutely. Professor, let's talk about the other issue which was raised in these proposals, the issue of raising maths and science standards. I want to understand first just why South Africa is behind. It doesn't seem to make sense to me, particularly that the fact that you had some schools actually being allowed to drop maths as a subject.
Well, as far as I'm aware, some of these schools drop maths as a subject because they are small schools. They're only allocated about 6 or 7 teachers, and they find it difficult in practice to offer mathematics as a subject, when only about 1 or 2 of the pupils in that school are interested in mathematics and perhaps don't have the ability to pass mathematics. Yeah. So I think it's a very complex subject, but mathematics should be offered at all schools that have the right capacity, that is in terms of teacher numbers, to offer the subject.
So where does the solution lie? Is it training more maths teachers and also just going back to the schools and saying to them, whichever way you like, you're going to have to take the maths and science?
I think the solution lies in making the profession of mathematics teaching an attractive one, so that a lot more teachers go into it and are going into that profession better qualified. And the way to do that is to make mathematics interesting and stimulating to teach. And that means, frankly, going beyond the school curriculum, which is quite narrow. There are many ways of going beyond the school curriculum to make mathematics fascinating, interesting, and worth pursuing as a career. And those options, such as mathematics competitions or science expos and a range of activities outside the curriculum, those activities are very important, and they will make the subject more interesting to the pupils, more interesting to their parents, and that's also important, and to the teachers.
Absolutely, Professor. Good luck with that one. I know I struggled initially with maths, though in my later years I broke into it and I was able to understand it. It's not an easy subject at all. Let's talk just very quickly before we leave the whole issue around the 30% mark for matrics. These reforms are suggesting a change in direction. Do you concur, and where should we take it? I am hearing 40%. I'm thinking, why would I want something like 40%? I want 50%.
Well, certainly at 40%, that means they don't know 60% of the subject. So this is an issue that really we haven't been too concerned about at university, because we're only taking them from a 70 or 80% upwards, even for entry into non-mathematical areas like the humanities. A decent pass in mathematics is regarded as a good benchmark of basic academic ability. So whether it's 30% or 40% doesn't seem to make much difference to me. It's still a very poor benchmark.
Absolutely. This is a discussion that will go on for years to come. I have to say thank you to Professor John Webb, Department of Mathematics at UCT, and Debbie Schafer, Minister of Education in the Western Cape.